Hi, my name is Roy Coughlan and welcome to the show. I've also got 5 podcasts: The Awakening Podcast, exposing fraud and corruption, but with solutions; the Crypto Podcast, talking about all things blockchain, NFTs, crypto; the Meditation Podcast, talking about all different types of meditation, but there's also meditations there from 1 minute to 2 hours. And the other one's the Learn Polish Podcast, so if you're interested in learning Polish, you can do that. And the other one is Speaking with Roy Coughlan, and I just have guests from around the world talking about either public speaking or also about their book or just general life in general. And you'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster. I'm also a podcasting coach, and you see the QR code there, and it's also on my link as well. And if you're interested in actually going on some podcast shows, I'm helping people doing that. Or if you're interested in sponsorship, you can contact me. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, DanielPacker.com. He helps people with anxiety, stress, and addictions. He's got a 90% success rate, and you only pay if you're successful. So be sure to check him out, DanielPacker.com. I hope you enjoyed this week's show.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome back to Freedom International live stream. And this is Grace Asagra of Quantum Nurse Podcast. And I'm really excited and to have Matthew back again. You know, as Matthew has always been a regular with us because it's so important that I could practice my discernment and my wisdom on choosing whom to invite and whom to listen to, not because we don't have any of our wisdom, to know what's good for us, but it's just good to be surrounded with people whom you can trust, whose intentions are sincere and pure, that it is an intention to serve humanity. And for me, Matthew Ehret is like that, and I bring to you this collaborative podcast as well, because our intention, Roy and I, has been doing this for many years now, and our intention is to really serve humanity. And serving humanity is also serving me, serving Roy, so serving others. Okay, so it's just that constant communication of good service for everyone. So Matthew is a you know is to be easy to a quick, is it like you say, a independent journalist, a geopolitical analyst, but he's truly more than that. Okay, sometimes there are just certain words that you cannot just put one person in one box and then compare them to all others. But as a holistic nurse, and from the very beginning of my wisdom as a teenager, I knew that there's so much more to that we should see and we should hear and we should look at. So Matthew brings that holistic perspective for my understanding, and I also like to respect so much my different people's culture. And what I like with Matthew is he brings that cultural in, importance, and of course he when he points to certain poets and scientists, musicians. I love that too, because when I was growing up, Matthew, I have this aunt who's is a her major was creative writing and literature. And when she used to bring us outside and lie down on the grass and read poetry, looking at the stars, feeling the moon. Okay, we don't have to talk about what moon is really is, but it was just like that environment of being up outside and on the shore and on the beach and that. So for me, these are all important. And so there's like no differentiation between science, spirituality, everything is kind of all connected. So when Matthew, you know, posted that his book is out, and his latest book is The Science Unshackled, Restoring Causality in a World of Chaos. I like that word science and unshackled, because for the last 4 years, for most of us, everything is like science, science, science. Aren't you following science, science, science? Follow the science. But whose science really is it? And what really happened to science? So Matthew will help us, understand more, what truly happened to science, and how can we apply what we know in our daily lives, because it's only the application of certain theories and knowledge that it could truly be a real truth for us. So Matthew is also a professor at the American University in Moscow, and when and his credentials are getting longer and longer. So to make it short,
Oh,
just
yeah.
go to risingtidefoundation.net, canadianpatreon.org, and go do the Substack as well. Okay, and him and his lovely wife Cynthia Chung has also been doing a lot of videos. And in fact, my first question with Matthew would be, when you are going to your next book or to your next whichever, either the video, the book, how do you what's your process like? Do you know it now what you're gonna do in 2 years? Or
Mm.
do you have some certain connection from the creator, from God, from the source that is kind of leading you, so
Hmm.
that you can provide that tangible outcome of your being? So how is that for the beginning?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And yeah, hi Grace, hi Roy. I always love chatting with you guys. And Grace, that was such a lovely, generous. I feel overly generous introduction, and I'll try to live up to it but no, I mean, for that first question, it's a great one. And I think that it's a little bit of both plan, like there's a little bit of system and a little bit of spontaneity in these sorts of things. Like the future is governed by sort of, there are certain trajectories that our planet moves on, that our galaxy is moving in, regarding a constellation of galaxies that we know very little about. But there's certain momentum already in process. And planets can't choose another orbit than the one that they're in. They're relative. They don't have the free will to wake up one day and say, I'm feeling like Venus, even though you're Mars. Like the Mars is going to be Mars. Venus will be Venus. The planets will be the planets. The atoms will be the atoms. They will have relatively deterministic. But I say relatively because they're still within a creative universe, right? At the end of the day, there's a limitation to that word, deterministic. But they won't be able to choose to be other than their nature. Human beings have the additional factor of free will, and I feel like there are trajectories that my mind moves in, as all of our minds do, and having the opportunity to write, which came about around 2000 and early 2019, is where I got my first offer from the Strategic Culture Foundation to receive remuneration for the first time for articles. And I was like, wow, I'm going to get paid a little bit to do writing. And I had always just did this out of, just the need. It's like a need for years. So I was like, wow, great. And it came the same day that I lost my job in a crap job that I was really despising. So I was like, this is perfect. This is the universe speaking to me. I should really take this seriously. And so, you're like, okay, well, I have to do something that merits the remuneration, and it's a great platform to amplify the thoughts I have inside of me with the things I've been working on, and hopefully I had a view to try to, whatever I tried to analyze geopolitically, to try to provide it in a manner that would be edifying in some fashion to the reader. So I didn't want to just inform. I always had that morally in my mind, that I want to provide something within my composition that will give people an insight that, if they're sensitive to it, will give them a power of thinking for themselves in a greater degree about something. Edification, right? The uplifting of the. But you start doing this on a regular basis, and it's like the iron heats up. It takes a while when you're molding iron as an ironsmith, for the heat to start making the iron malleable. That's sort of the creative process in my mind. But when the momentum gets started, the heat gets hotter, and it's easier to start to chart out goals for yourself. You're like, okay, I'm more sensitive to something that is needed as an analysis that is in the world today regarding whatever is going on regarding COVID, things going on or misinformation I'm seeing on Ukraine or the Middle East or whatever, you pick a thing. And oftentimes the analysis is complex. The world is much more complicated than the simplistic analyses we're given. Even amongst the alternative media world, there's a tendency of oversimplifying in my taste, at least. I want nuance. I want to see the historical currents. And as you pointed out in the introduction, as soon as you scratch on one thing, it doesn't take you long if you're a universalist to find the everything connected to anything that you're scratching on, right? You're looking at something in the scientific field, and all of a sudden it's not too many steps before you're like touching upon the Plato's School of Athens and the battles against the cult of Delphi, and so you're sort of finding that there's an intersectionalism in everything. So I found that I needed more space than simply the articles of writing a 2,000 to 3,000 word article was sometimes not enough to convey what I wanted. So I would find myself choosing to write in the form of, in my mind, chapters. So I'd be like, okay, if I'm tackling something about the cybernetics, what is transhumanism, right? That's a big question. I can't just write an article. So I was like, okay, I'm going to write something that will allow me to do a follow-up. And I'll try to have something contained so that people could, if most people I know will just read that one article. But some people will end up reading the second article after that. And I'll try to do it. So my idea was to, as much as possible, try to do self-contained compositions that would give people some satisfaction, but also some unsatisfaction, some wanting more, because there is more and I want more. So that would then plant the seed for the next follow-up of the story that might involve going back into the, into the battles of the British East India Company and Thomas Huxley a century earlier. That is connected, but not in a mechanistic way. And so I found myself doing this as a habit. And at a certain point, I realized, well, after the first year and a half of practicing this muscle, I was like, well, I kind of have, looking back at my articles or my essays that I've published, enough for a book. There's like a cohesive story that ties together and could make a book. So that became 1 volume, then 2 volumes, then 3 volumes of the Clash of the Two Americas book series. My wife picked up a very similar technique. She's got her own method, but a very similar technique. And that's how sort of her Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Set book, it's manifested, because she was also a writer with me on strategic culture. And the work on science that manifested in this book here with the angel breaking free of the shackles, restoring causality in a world of chaos, happened through a similar process, a little bit slower. But in terms of, and I have a little subtitle saying a sequel to the Clash of the Two Americas. And I really wanted to put that in there to get people to understand that my work on science had a lot to do with my research. And some of it was quite original research on deep history and the historical structures of the deep state, so-called, as it's been called in more recent times, which required looking at standard models, that standard explanatory models of as they call it, historiography. Stupid word. History research, big stories, big narratives that are given to historians in academia if they want to be respected, published, have a job, rise in the ranks of influence within think tanks or within whatever. You have to abide by certain axioms about what causes history, what is, America's story. There's you could have different flavors that you can select from. If, I'm an eco-feminist, I want to look at history from the lens of an eco-feminist, or I want to look at history from the standpoint of a dialectic materialist, post-structuralist Marxist, or I want to look at history from the standpoint of a libertarian Austrian school analysis, which each one comes with a set of baggage, assumptions, blind assumptions. Some of those assumptions are the same across all apparently different flavors, are certain common flaws in thinking or in assumed laws of history, which create what appears to be different, internally consistent explanations of how history happened, recent and deep history, but also similar systemic flaws that prevent the mind from recognizing what I could see was a driving force regarding oligarchical systems that have a direct continuity. Because I know that at no point in human civilization have we ever been liberated from the top-down influence of oligarchical families that maintain a direct continuity of both bloodline, but also method and internal culture from the days of ancient Babylon to the present, that have a similar modus operandi, although their branding, their form of how they do things changes. It's the same secret sauce, that uses very similar elementary techniques of perception management, getting the slaves to fight themselves, keeping people, in the illusion of freedom without the real thing. So there's certain techniques that all empires, oligarchies will always use that have been there at the heart of Canadian history, American history, European history, you name it. No part of the world is untouched by this principle of master-slave relations. And none of the historical, popular, at least modern historical models that we're expected to adopt in polite society take into proper consideration this thing. So I was fortunate enough, and I know I'm talking a lot, but it's sort of like it's a big question you threw at me, right? So sorry, I'm trying to do justice to it. I was fortunate enough to encounter early on in my intellectual development the thinking of Lyndon LaRouche and the Schiller Institute back in 2006, and that was after a couple of years of on my own trying to make sense of Masonic conspiracies. And I made certain amounts of little discoveries for my own that I could own, but I still didn't know any. I didn't have a sense of causation. Ultimately, I didn't have a sense of solutions. I was still very depressed by my research into conspiracies at that point from 2004 to 2006. It was a time of a lot of sort of emotional pain, discovering, the world is the way it is, right? 9/11's a fraud, all this stuff. And people listening know what this is like in different degrees. We all have our experience, but so that was mine. And I lacked solutions. And so through meeting LaRouche, through a small office that was available in Canada at the time near where I was working, I studied some of the literature. I found some of it very attractive, some of it very insulting to my sensibilities. There's a big emphasis on how human beings were these divine good creatures and scientific progress was a great thing. And in my mind, where from I was coming from at that point, I wasn't ready to hear that. I was like, no, human beings are overpopulated. We are toxic. We make empire. We make the world worse. We do 9/11s. We do we're just science is like nuclear bombs, right? I only had the idea of the popular idea of science of like descriptive mathematical, mad scientists, Dr. Strangeloves, stiff engineers that didn't have any artistic flexibility. That I was going in university, and so the university system is very compartmentalized. The artistic world that I was in, I was in fine arts, was very indoctrinated to be emotionally opposed to reason. The idea of using your reason was pollutant to the purity and authenticity of artistic feelings. And the engineers who shared the same building where in my university with the fine arts students, it was a fine arts engineering building split down the middle, right? The right side of the building was all 18 floors. It was all fine arts. The left side of the building, 18 floors, all engineering. There was no wall separating physically, but there was no intercourse, no communication between the students or the teachers from either world. It was I think a social engineering experiment, but a very clear sense of the microcosm of the disease that's been created for all of humankind, to be convinced that we have to either be left-brained thinkers or right-brained feelers. So for me, where I was coming from was I was poisoned with a lot of that, where I was like, okay, science is left brain logic that makes the world bad. art is right brain, whatever, emotional feeling expression, the freedom to be irrational, the freedom to be ugly, the freedom, because that's more true, right? If I show my ugliness, my pain, I'm a mirror of the ugliness of the world. That's to be more true and authentic. So I had a lot of this stuff crippling my ability to appreciate some of the messages I was receiving from the Lyndon LaRouche and his organization's representatives at the time. But it took me a while to like think it through. And then I realized in the course of being a volunteer and working through the history of science, the history of how these oligarchical systems came to be. And that's where some of my spiritual infrastructure was built up, was through this experience. LaRouche had made a point that science had been undermined. And what we were told was Western science really wasn't Western science. It was a fraud. It didn't exist. The real Western science has been suppressed. And he made certain provocative statements like, Isaac Newton is a fraud. I'm like, you can't say that. That was, so I would hear LaRouche say Isaac Newton is a fraud. I'm like, you can't just say that. His formulas work. And, and sure enough, when you actually read the writings, because it's like, how do you prove such a statement? Well, Lyndon LaRouche, he's dead now, but he was a self-trained autodidact. He made certain new discoveries in the science of physical economy in the 1950s. He was on record as predicting certain major economic crises years before they happened, but he was able to say when they would happen, how they would happen, and he had no crystal ball. He wasn't using tea leaf reading. He was just looking at certain parameters that other people were not looking at regarding the physical reality of food production, how many people there are, what is the ability, the energy that we have access to, such that decisions that were being made by Kissinger and others, you could see clearly, would reduce food production, resulting in tension, resulting in crises, or energy production. Right? If you reduce the ability to have a certain quality of energy per capita, you will. It doesn't matter how much money you have increasing in the system; it'll be devoid of real value, and that money is an illusion. That wealth is an illusion if the physical economy, the infrastructure is decaying, breaking down. So it's very common sense, but that's been trained out of us. And LaRouche made a point that it was because of his years of research into some of the original writings of people like Johannes Kepler, Leibniz, Huygens. Like there's certain scientists, continental scientists, who made wonderful discoveries that we could know who Isaac Newton plagiarized. Because you could take any of the famous formulas, whether the calculus, the laws of gravitation that are attributed to Newton, his work on optics, and just by scratching a little bit, you could find very quickly that none of those discoveries were actually made by Newton. They were all discoveries made by people well before Newton, using a very different method of thinking that Newton essentially said you're not allowed to do. In his Principia Mathematica, he actually says in his first edition that good science involves simply using your perceptions and extrapolating patterns and calling it universal if you want to be a great mind like he is. And he had rules of reasoning. So if anybody was stupid enough, and too many people were, to use his rules of mental reasoning, you would be guaranteed to never make a discovery, because discoveries are not made that way. You have to use your senses and you have to look for patterns. That's true. But that is not the source of a new discovery like a Kepler or a Leibniz or anything. That's not how it happens. There is something more to it that is extracted as people learn the dead formulas and use simply their senses. And this quality of the spirit, the faith in the beauty, that idea that there is a harmony outside of or beyond the chaos of the senses, that the heart can work with the mind, the conscience with the mind, in leaping beyond the limits of knowledge, in making these creative discontinuous leaps into eurekas, into these discovery moments. It's not irrational. It's not something that is unintelligible, but it is not purely dead logic. No computer can do this. Computers cannot do this. So this is something, but you get it when you read the writings of Kepler, because you read the writings of people who made the discoveries and they're available. They're not always easy to get. And I try to include as many of those in the book as possible. you get a sense, okay, they tell you the method, they tell you even the mistakes they make, because they want future citizens to replicate in some degree the process more than the simple byproduct of the process, which is the formula, the law of planetary motion. It's the process that matters more than the right answer. And you start seeing that it's the same thing, whether you're reading Plato's dialogues and Plato's work on Timaeus, or you're reading St. Augustine, another Platonic Christian in the 5th century who was reviving Plato's method in the way that he was, or you read the revival of the Augustinian Platonists in the pre-Renaissance, like Dante or Peter Abelard, or you look at the scientific revolution that became the Golden Renaissance, and it was all based upon this same Pythagorean Platonic movement, which was based on the idea that there is a faith in a reasonable, loving, moral creator. Different names are given depending on what religious, culture you're looking at, because the same thing appears in the Asiatic world's history, in the Muslim world. It appears, you see it everywhere, where great bursts of goodness, new discoveries, increased ability to sustain more people at a higher quality of life will tend to occur, just as you have the inverse dark age moments where we lose the ability to have that creative freedom and that vitality that is needed for society to replicate itself successfully. You have populations that collapse and populations that increase at different moments in different history. And if you look at, well, what are the dominant ideas allowing for either the good or the bad, you'll find certain universal variables that appear onto the scene given different names. But so the idea of a creative, loving, reasonable God is a constant. That faith, the idea that the understanding that the musicality, the aesthetical aspect of ourselves, and the reasoning part must work together. So Kepler is a musician; he's a singer. That's part of his power of having insight into the musicality of the spheres of the planetary orbits. Leibniz also, he's a poet. He's working with poets and with musicians. He's helping to make musicians and make musical instruments. Bach, in large measure, thinks like a scientist as well as a great musician. And in all cases, they see their science and their art as almost like a sacred act, a prayer almost, as instruments of the creator. And it manifests in political revolutions as well for the good. So that all gave me a lot of resources that I found very useful in my historical research that became the Untold History of Canada book series, as well as the Clash of the Two Americas. And then I was like, well, at the end of the day, now it seems necessary to make more explicit what was this scientific method that Benjamin Franklin was a part of as a tradition that made the American Revolution possible in the U.S. Constitution, as he was also he was known as the Prometheus in America. He was the greatest scientific mind of the world that he lived in, because he was a self-conscious part of that tradition. So how now it's time, I think I should make that more explicit. So the chapters in that book that I just published deal with that in different angles, from the realm of physical science, the idea whether the universe is dead or alive, biological sciences, as well as human sciences.
Thank you very much, Matt. And please be assured, I expect you to talk a lot. I appreciate you talking a lot, but do drink your tea to soothe your throat, because things are happening with our throat when we talk too much. But I appreciate because, and I know you can't stop anymore moving forward and being so creative in everything that you do, so you could reach out to people and we all have different ways of understanding and learning. So that's one thing. If you want to be an effective communicator, that's one. And that's when we were saying about the methodology, when we as learners, as viewers and listeners, adepts, whatever you could consider yourself, when we are aware of the methodology, I think that's one way that we can help discern certain information, because the internet and nowadays, is changing so much that we are like, it's like, my analogy is like we're in the ocean of information, and with all those tides up and down, and you'd never know. So yeah, the methodology. And
Mhm.
just, and to for the viewers, if you're still not convinced with this few minutes that Matthew shared to us, that you're not convinced that you should really read and purchase his books and PDF. When I attended, Matthew, a recent in-person meeting or event here with Vera Sharab, was supposedly be in person, but she couldn't come, so she participated through Zoom. But Christine Anderson was present. You know what they were giving away when someone registers for for that event? Guess what? They were giving away your books, your PDFs. Okay?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's, for me, that's a sign. That's, it tells you that Matthew's documents, his historical documents, is not just something that could be just published and no one should read about it. Okay, so that's how important it is. And I was so excited when someone said, what they're giving away, it's your favorite person. I said, oh, good. So thank you for that. Now,
Hey.
and
Cool.
but what happened with the with the science, when when you were mentioned, and when you tackle the science, it seems like the unshackled, it seems like you have to go back eons, ancients of civilization. And it's quite interesting that even if they shackle it and you're trying to unshackle it, but there are many signs that you can't really unshackle creativity and truth and science. And you're when you are connected, when we are a part of a perfect creation. Okay, maybe not perfect, but there's always the potential to be perfect. Okay, when what happened to that? Because in as a holistic nurse, when I first read about Albert Pop, and he was the scientist who was popularized the biophotons. And then that also led me to reading, the book on worlds in what's that? Worlds in crisis or something. I kind of
In collision. Worlds in
collision.
collision.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't have Matthew's memory, but I in my heart, I encrypt those energy. So Matthew, what happened to that? Because we know that it's science is, and everything is infiltrated. So people, I want you to keep talking about that, so that people will understand that, hey, whatever you're seeing and hearing and reading, keep in mind that there could be a lot of distortions. And then so I'll pass it on to Roy.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to. I remember. I brought this up a few times, but I think it's an important subjective experience from my life, where I feel a bit ashamed that I went through a period when I was a dumb student, maybe 21 or something, and I was trying to make sense of what is science. I felt intellectually deficient. So I was trying to read some pop science books that I found at a bookstore I was working at, and that gave me a false sense of confidence about knowing things I didn't really know anything about. It was like one of these Cliff's Notes of scientific everything. It was a book called A Brief History of Nearly Everything, and it's an entertaining book to read by Bill Bryson. And I felt like now I got like a tour of the standard model quantum of the atom, of Big Bang cosmology, of biological science, Darwinism, everything, So I was like, okay, now I feel like I could speak and sound smart at parties, and I didn't know what real knowledge was. So I figured that was satisfying to me. And one of the lessons subtly was obviously that that science is mathematical description of the universe. that the current math was satisfactory to give us competent explanations for everything. Dark matter, we could talk about how 97% of the universe is made of dark matter and dark energy, and we could talk about when the universe was created and even calculated down to the picosecond or the nanosecond, when the four fundamental forces we were told exist split off 13.7.2, whatever it is, to the 10 to the 13th degree billion years ago. We know exactly all of these things. So I'm like, okay, if we know all of this, well, then we know exactly what's in the sun. We know exactly what's in the earth. It's thermal convection causing iron to sort of like migrate up and down, causing the magnetic field of the earth to shift. And we know that, and we know what causes the mechanism of life to change. And we know everything. So I actually got in a fight, and I unfortunately, I feel like I made fun of this kid, and I think I got other people to laugh at this open-minded kid in my school, who was trying to just say or share his feeling of awe and wonder about how little we know about the universe. And I was like, no, are you stupid? And I eviscerated him. Basically with the idea that no, mathematics has told us everything. It's just ironing out the details. And I feel, again, I feel if I could go back in time, I would have slapped myself on the back of the head, because it's just the dumbest thing. And I see that now that I've taken on it, I've shifted my mind in terms of looking at things differently. I see this everywhere. Like that opinion that I had that made me have that reprehensible worldview is something I see in different degrees all over the place. And you get it with trust the science, right? And you have to be an expert with a PhD in the system in order to have an opinion that should be respected about climate change or about health science or cellular biology or virology or whatever. And if you don't have that, you should just keep your mouth shut and adopt opinions of experts. Right. That's sort of that's what we're told we need to do if we want to be responsible citizens, is not have our own thoughts or use our own reasoning, but just adopt whatever standards are accepted by the experts. So that's obviously sick. And then, yeah, when you start like looking into what actually drives cellular health, there's a chapter I wrote on Dr. Luc Montagnier's work as a gateway into this discussion. His later work, especially on lights, electromagnetism, and life, and DNA, as well as even bacteria and other cells, as being both transmitters of electromagnetic material that allows the propagation of information through usually water mediums, but it could even be other forms of media too, as far as I could understand it, as well as receptors, right? So receptors, transformers, even every cell both receives constant streams of electromagnetic information, some good, some destructive, some not. That's how the cells communicate, and that transforms it through processes we have yet to understand, incredible processes, and then transmits that outwards for other forms of communication, leaving also its imprint into the liquid medium that it might be within, often our body, but it could be a variety of things. And so Luc Montagnier did incredible work on this domain, earning him a lot of enemies. There was a giant witch hunt before he died to take away his Nobel Prize, because this is heresy. And so, but when you scratch on, it's not like he just appeared in a vacuum. There's this whole tradition that he was stepping into by doing this, that was picked up from somebody who influenced him, Jacques Benveniste, but also Fritz Albert Popp, the German scientist who lived out. I did a lot of great work in Israel on biophoton emissions, how to measure the biophoton emissions of all cells that are constantly, every time you get a mitosis, you get a little burst of a photon of light being created, right? That allows for this amazing, I don't know, 40 trillion or more quadrillion. I don't even know how many cells are in our body, but the amount of turnover is incredible. Birth and death of cells is in the 30, 40 million per second. That's a huge amount of like change going on. And to have that type of communication so that our body doesn't either atrophy or our heart doesn't, like, our heart cells don't overgrow too fast relative to our liver cells or something. It's an incredible amount of communication, that molecular biology, the materialist approach to biology, fails at explaining properly, as if that enzymes are materially, because we're told enzymes carry the information, right, from one cell to another, that then like unpacks, can unravel a DNA and whatever, give instructions for what the cell should do and replicate or not. And it's like that the speed is magnitudes too slow in that model to explain what's actually happening. Light satisfies it. Light speed works. So, you know, Fritz Popp himself was taking up the torch left by people like Gurvich, who I go through quite a bit in the book. Alexander Gurvich, a Russian scientist who worked with Vladimir Vernadsky in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, who first discovered ways, even before there were devices sensitive enough to pick up the very low level light frequencies that cells emit. He was able to set up crucial experiments using onion roots, planes of glass that would cut out certain types of EM emissions, especially on the ultraviolet level. Different quartz glasses that he was also using that would permit the transference, the passing through of certain frequencies of EM emissions. And he was able to relatively quickly prove that there must be from an onion root growing and separated by another onion root on the other side of a glass, he was able to prove that there must be ultra weak photon ultraviolet emissions that allow for a communication of cells. And he had a crucial experiment that proved it irrefutably. And his work sponsored a whole movement in Russia of optical biophysics, who made discoveries in handedness, chirality, the idea that, you know, certain molecular structures that you guys heard of chirality or chiralism? No?
Does that have something to do with optics also and the light, right?
Kind of, yeah. Like it's a fascinating domain, but basically it stems from an observation that you have certain molecules that are chemically identical, right? So they'll have the same configuration geometrically but they will be sort of like the mirror image of each other. So you could have like whatever the molecule is that gives off the flavor of spearmint has a certain molecular configuration, right? Certain relationship of atoms, and its copy, or not its copy, but by arranging the same atoms in the same molecular configuration that gives you spearmint, if you do it in the opposite way, the other handedness, the attribute it gives off is something like lime or something like that. Or like the chemical molecule that gives you aspartame in one, inversely, which has like a reception to the electrochemical aspect of life when touched, gives you a sweet taste. Inversely, its opposite gives you almost like a bitter taste that can kill you. Not to say that aspartame can't kill you, but it's one's more direct. So it's weird that you have these, or fascinating that a molecular chemist would not differentiate a qualitative difference between the chiral nature of both types of molecules, but they are totally different, right, in terms of their qualitative identity when you test them out, especially in relation to life, like what their purpose is in a broader scheme of things, and they're everywhere. So you have certain spirals. Go on.
Yeah, you know what that reminds me, Matthew, is in the quantum morphogenetic physics. So when you're talking about the biofield, or better yet, more than the biofield, is the morphogenetic resonance. And that kind of brings me to the theory of the source particle. So when you have the source particle that comes out with source particle negative and source particle positive, that it's so that it doesn't exactly come out with the same, structure as you define, but then another thing comes up. So that's kind of when you're talking about that, theory, that's what comes up with me. So because
when you say the source particle, can you define a little bit more in your words what the source particle means to you?
So for me, the source particle is the one that is created with a creator, which is omnipotent, which is neither positive or negative, or within it, is that. So then that is kind of like, that's why I can't fully resonate with the Big Bang theory as well. Because for me, the Big Bang doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense that there's no, and in the source particle, for me, what makes sense is that there's a certain structure that kind of either a structure that goes down or goes up. So it steps down. So in fact, not to give Matthew's head bigger again, but I always think of Matthew as the step down of the creator, and we also as a step up of a creator. So anyway, that's for me that source particle is. But it's always have to do with frequencies.
Yeah. Well, that's everything is free. Everything was harmonics and musicality at the end of the day. But yeah, I think like in Gurvich's work, the idea of he's got his own word for morphogenetic field, but he has multiple nested kinds of fields. So you have the biophoton emissions or the mechanism of communication. He calls it something a little bit different, but it's the same thing as what Fritz Popp talks about. But he also describes, he's looking, a lot of his ideas come about through his work on embryology. And he's really fascinated by the false dichotomization in the debate around embryology in the 19th and even into the 1920s, 30s, around the two different opposing schools trying to explain how embryos go from, or single-celled, fertilized egg into blastulas, into multiply division, like a very complex being that becomes like a baby giraffe or a human or a monkey or a fish or whatever. So everyone's trying to figure out, like, it's a big domain, and the fight is between the mechanists and the vitalists. Both of them bring something to the table, but there's also something lacking. And Gurvich is fascinated by what's lacking. And he's trying to take the best of both worlds. And, you got like the Hans Drisch and the mechanists on the one side, and you got Spemann, and I forgot the other guy. No, Drisch is a vitalist. Spemann, is he anyway, within the mechanistic school, they're of the view that no, every single step of the way, there's no design, there's no blueprint. Every step of the way, any cell could become anything, and it's and so what defines the growth of every moment in the sequence of cell to fully formed organism is relatively contained within the directly before, directly after moment, right? Very myopic. The other school is like, no, it's all built in from the very moment of the cell, the egg being fertilized. Everything is preordained from the get-go, in terms of what each division of labor is going to be. And at first there's a high degree of flexibility of diversification of labor. So at the early stages of the embryo, every cell could be literally anything. But then at a certain point, a decision is made, right, in the process where, okay, this is going to be a liver cell. This is no longer going to be an anything cell. It's going to be a liver cell, and this is going to be a brain cell. So that there's moments, discontinuous moments, where that specifically happens. And certain experiments are set up. So one group goes and like says, okay, I'm gonna cut with like a baby hair, right, an early blastomere, and I'm gonna like take the early like 16 cells from the top and the bottom, and I'm gonna move them. So I guess this would have been the vitalist. I forget who would have done it. But they separate them. So the one that was going to become, let's say the bum, is replaced with the cells that were going to become the brain. And in fact it works. The animal then still becomes like a fully formed duck, not a mutant. And so one school appears to win, and then the other school says, okay, well, what I'm going to do, and this is where I guess it must have been the vitalist, where he says, okay, I'm going to burn with a needle half of the embryo at the same stage of development. It must have been the blastomere stage, where there's like, I don't know, 64 cells. I'm going to burn the bottom half, or maybe a little bit later. And sure enough, what happens is it's half an animal forms. So both sides seem to be touching on something right. And it's kind of a stalemate. Nobody wins the debate. And what people aren't asking is, are the sorts of questions, well, what's allowing the communication to happen to begin with? What's the pattern? And Gurvich is really of the view that there is a morphogenetic whole, which is defining the end product. So he does believe in that, like the vitalists do, but he also allows for the the truths of the mechanical school to also come into play too, because there is a mechanical rigor lacking in the vitalists who tend to be overly into just it's all part of the plan, man. Like, you know, part of that kind of like mushy mindedness, and don't overthink it, you know, and that's making people sort of miss actual evidence that they could be looking at that would give them an insight into looking at the biophoton emissions. So, but the idea that the whole governs the parts is really important for all systems, whether it's the galaxy, the universe, our body. It's obviously that there's something more than our bodies that define Grace and Roy and Matt when we look in the mirror, right? That's always there, independent of all of the cell turnover we've had since we were like 7 years old. Despite all of that, there's still like something as a constancy that's transcendental. So it's like that with the biosphere or anything. It's more, all wholes are more than the sum of parts.
Sorry, like with the kind of trust of science kind of thing, because a lot of the testing was done in a petri dish. I mean, that is without the life force. So straight away we kind of knew that there was a lot of fakeness. But what I heard recently, and I was like, ooh, made me think even deeper, was the MRI scans. Because you're actually lying there in a still kind of meditative state instead of the way you're moving around. So that's not even accurate.
Yeah. No, I mean it's better than like, just it's better than a purely mathematical model, because it's still coming from you. These are still frequency magnetic fields that your brain is creating, and that's fine. But you're right. It's not like you can't say that that's your natural state, because no one ever just like lies stressfully on a or whatever in whatever state on a mat inside of an MRI machine. No, it's a small sliver of reality. It's not reality for sure. Absolutely.
So I'm going to take a little tangent here now, because Grace mentioned the moon at the start. I see the planet behind you, and a lot of the stuff, because you know, you like with all the Masonic groups and everything, they're really demonic. They're into this 666 and everything connected with the Earth. And I'm even seeing more of it. I mean, the tilt is like 23.4 degrees. Take it away from 90, you got 66.6. It's spinning at 66,600 miles per hour. And apparently the moon is, I don't know, circumference, it's like 600 by 6 by 6. There's so many things that are connected with the 6 that it's like, this isn't a kind of coincidence. This is kind of, have you ever gone down that crazy rabbit hole?
Well, I did a lot of work on Kepler, and a lot of work on physical geometries. One thing that Kepler, so people can actually buy his Harmonies of the World. It's five books that he wrote in 1619, going through how his mind discovered the third planetary law of harmonics of motion, right? Plagiarized later by Newton, and I would say the whole Rosicrucian occultist network that took over England and that created the British Royal Society, and sort of drove the Enlightenment movement in opposition to the Renaissance movement. It wasn't the organic outcome, as we've been told, of the Renaissance, which was the Enlightenment. That's not true. That was a political warfare to derail the flow of what emerged with the Golden Renaissance. It was not a direct. There's no direct continuity. It's a break. And Kepler puts in his book, he puts a lot of emphasis on getting people to do work on the Pentagon, the star Pentagon, and the different relationships inside of the star Pentagon, in terms of the square root of 5 minus 1 over 2, and the different types of proportions that can have a mathematical representation when you investigate the golden section. And the golden section for Kepler is the starting point. He's like, start with an investigation of the golden section, because this is something that, and he's even citing Leonardo da Vinci, who's doing work also with Luca Pacioli earlier, and Nicholas of Cusa on this proportion that we find all over the place when looking at the flow of organic life, the replication of animals, the proportions that we find in living species, even in microbes, which we don't tend to find in non-living molecules. So the golden section doesn't seem to appear in inorganic chemistry or physics. It's something which really appears all over the place in living matter. However, the Kepler has a lot of enemies, one of whom he devotes actually the appendix in the form of his warfare against Robert Fludd. And for those who know, they know that Robert Fludd is very closely in alignment He's a leading figure of the Rosicrucians, which are they're basically a proto-Freemasonic order embedded inside of Britain at this time, who are working to it's the occult soul of the deep state of England that had been brought in by Venice, that was in the midst of taking control of England and turning it into the base of an evil empire. So it's this occult underground through the Rosicrucian networks that are represented by Francis Bacon, John Dee. Robert Flood is a big one. Elias Ashmole a little bit later becomes a leader of this, the head of the Ashmolean Museum. And so he's in the living world of Kepler, he is his primary nemesis, and they're in a hot conflict. Now Flood is of the view that, yeah, we should talk about the golden section, but when you read Flood's work, it's through there's zero knowledge. It's all based upon a worship of the relationships and an interpretation that attempts to give an elitist feeling for inner initiates who have gone through memorizing certain symbols that are associated with certain rituals that bring them through rites of initiation, that give them a sense of elitism over the masses, who are thus, as soon as you have that elitist sense that I have secret Gnostic knowledge because of my self-hypnotic process of initiation into a mystery school, all of a sudden you can't love your fellow man. You just can't. Like you're obviously, you're a special pseudo divine being. It puts you into a very bad place, but a very useful one if you're an empire or an imperialist. So in their world, they would write their hermetic texts in a fashion that was devoid of understanding. Whereas Kepler's work, he's taking you lovingly through the process of how the mind will discover the nature and necessity of the constructions of the pentagon, of the dodecahedron, as you unfold the pentagon into 12 faces and wrap it around inside of an interior of a sphere. And you'll find that you will create a dodecahedron that touches the sphere at 12 vertices, right? Or 20 vertices and 12 faces. And inversely, you could take the inverse of that and connect the insides, the centers of each of the pentagonal faces of that dodecahedron, connect them together, and you'll get an icosahedron, which has the inversely 12 vertices and 20 faces that are triangles. But you'll also have the pentagon, the golden section, showcasing itself in different ways in both spheres. These are 2 of the 5 Platonic solids. The other 3 are the tetrahedron, the cube, and the inverse of the cube, which is the octahedron. So if you take the cube and you connect the 5 centers of the cube, right? All 6 of the 5 squares on the cube surface, connect them together, what shape are you going to get? If you imagine it in your mind's eye, right? Imagine a cube. And then imagine the center points of the cube connecting together. Can you imagine like what shape you're getting?
Triangles in sphere.
Yeah, you got
and triangles.
Well, you got 8 triangles that will show that will appear, 8 equilateral triangles, and in the form of an octahedron, so 8 sides inside of that cube. So the cube has an inverse, and if you do the same thing with the octahedron, and you connect each of the 8 centers of the triangles of the faces of the octahedron, connect them together, you'll get a tiny cube. So the cube will create an octahedron, the octahedron will create a cube. The dodecahedron will create an icosahedron, the icosahedron will create a dodecahedron. If you connect the faces of the triangles inside the icosahedron, which has 20 faces, connect them all together, and you'll get a dodecahedron with 12 pentagonal faces. The tetragon is different because it has 4 triangular faces, but if you connect those together, you get another tetrahedron. So it's a dual of itself, sort of the mediator. Now Kepler made a point that you could look at the proportions mathematically of these different things. If you nest, what he called nesting, you could nest them inside of each other. See if I have a picture of it here.
Just like the simple Russian doll nesting.
Yeah, but you got to do it in a rational way. It can't be like it can't be whatever. But there's a way to select them reasonably, and you will find certain proportions mathematically emerge, which is very useful in conducting astronomy and looking at the speeds and distances of the planets from the sun. And I don't have the graph. I don't know what page he has the graph. Anyway, so in Kepler's world, he's noticing, as Plato was earlier in the Timaeus dialogue or in the Theaetetus dialogue, the quantization, the harmonic quantization of all physical space-time. So everything that exists that's ponderable is both a one. It has a unifying identity, a monad, right? As Grace had a term that was used, the fundamental particle is what you called it, or the what do you call it?
Source particle.
Source particle, yeah. So you have that. There's different names given to it, but it's like you have the identity of the thing, which is it's a simple identity. It's undivisible. That infuses purpose, reason, being into the thing itself in the material world. But then you also have the material part of its expression, which is infinitely divisible. So everything can be both a oneness. It partakes in oneness, in infinite divisibility and infiniteness. I could imagine my cup forever being divided into ever smaller, particles forever. I can imagine that. But then Plato and Kepler, and they all make the point that between the one and the infinite, there's the many. And it's easy to leap from the infinite to the one, or the one to the infinite. And a lot of people make the mistake of doing that irresponsibly without taking the time to first explore the many and their nature in between. And Plato gives the example in his Philebus dialogue of a musical string, of just a string, any string, and there's like one sound the string emits, and there's infinite possible sounds you could make within the string depending on where you choose to create a division, right? Plucking the string. But there's specific discoverable points that if you divide the string by half, you create an octave. It has an identity which is directly half of the frequency of the whole, a high C, low C, right? And between the high C, low C, you could take a 2/3, 3/4, 4/5, 5/6 of the string and pluck them, hear the sound, and note that the relationship with the whole and with the parts are consonant. They're pleasing to the soul. And Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, his work on well tempering, comes out of his studies of Kepler's harmonics. And you could have a mathematical expression of them. So you'll find that there are certain numbers that will tend to occur within nature because of the quantization in harmonics within all of material, chemical, optical aspects of reality, material reality. You'll find that these harmonies, the golden proportion, you'll find it all over the place if you're looking for it. And it couldn't be known through maths, but they always have a mathematical expression that will always be imperfect, because math will always, especially when dealing with these transfinite numbers or irrational numbers like square root of 2 or square root of 5 or pi, a higher transfinite. You're always dealing with things that if you try to express it purely mathematically through symbolic language, it'll always be an infinite number, like 0.0, 1 forever. So the mind won't be able to hold it. But if you treat it geometrically, the square root of 2 or the square root of 5 is extremely expressible in a way that the mind can completely wrap itself around. You could literally see the square root of 2 is take a square, right, with side 1, the other side 1, the area is 1, and then double the square. And as soon as you double the square, it involves using the diameter of that first square, which is square root of 2. So all of a sudden, what is unexpressible, so-called irrational mathematically, becomes very rational geometrically. That's how it's discovered. So a lot of the things that I think we find in the circumference of the Earth, the different rates of change, come from the fact that they all participate in a quantized divineness. And the oligarchy, with their occultism, will always try to, you get this with reading Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. He has a whole lot of sections on the Pythagorean theorem and the magic of the golden section. There's no knowledge ever. They try to mystify it and co-opt it for mystical ritual without ever taking the time. I don't think Albert Pike ever constructed the golden section ever in his life. I don't think Francis Bacon ever did any honest discovery research on the things that they want to treat like with occult mystery that then they use in their numerological exercises to carry out designs that involve the lives of many people on the earth. Doing certain things at a blood moon. They have their all of this occult, and yeah, it gets freaking evil at the end of the day. Like, they got a lot of ritual that they've infused into what should otherwise be a very intelligible, beautiful discovery process of, creation. And they mystified it for a Gnostic inner elite order of initiates. So yeah, that's how I'd respond to that one.
No, beautiful. Yeah. Because I've even heard that it's actually a lucky number. It's been a good number, and they've just changed it to make it look it's like demonic.
So yeah, they'll take everything good and make it bad. That's what they do. Yeah.
So I'm not sure, are you up to speed with what's kind of happening with Ukraine? But I heard today that like Poland are kind of getting a bit involved since Tusk is now at the helm. And I mean, he was kind of the president of Europe there previously. Like, so are you up to speed with what's going on there, or have you seen anything? Because even the conscription, they were bringing, like, they were women as well from Ireland. I saw letters that they were like saying, yeah, now you have to go to the war. So the people that they basically had taken in saying, yeah, you've escaped the war-torn zone, now they're sending them back to fight.
Oh my God, are they actually doing that? Are they? Okay.
Yeah.
No, I've
seen the letters. Like, I've actually seen a government letter, and if people kind of knew their sovereignty and everything, because they're not signing it properly, there's ways of getting out of it. But the fact that that's actually going on in this day and age is insane.
Oh, it's really, really absurdly evil. No, I mean, I just gotten over a bad flu, so I was a little out of it. But I did read that Tusk had won the elections in Poland, and I was becoming optimistic a little bit about the Polish government that was showing a little bit of cojones by cutting off their support for the Ukrainian military and sort of not playing ball the way they were expected to, which I found very, very, very useful to throw some sand in the gears. But then Tusk, who, for people who, most people listening probably know this. I mean, this guy was the head of, the European Parliament or the European Parliament, right? For a few years. This guy's a complete globalist, Eurocrat fanatic, and very dangerous that he's been brought back into play in Poland, which is very strategic. No, I mean, the whole Ukraine thing, it appears to me, based on the messaging that we're seeing in the Wall Street Journal, in a lot of different parts of the American establishment, that Ukraine is ultimately not the favored child anymore, that they're putting more of their emphasis upon what's been sparked in the Middle East. But and Zelensky's kind of desperate, like they're not releasing the promised funds even now to Ukraine from the United States. They did release a lot, but there's still more that they've been withholding. And Zelensky's, being sent on, and his usual, he's a salesman. That's his whole job, is just to be an international traveling salesman, selling the Ukraine cause. And he's, just was sent to like Argentina to do his thing there, and do a little song and dance and beg for cash, beg man for cash. But no, it seems like when I was looking at the Wall Street Journal, they recently posted something that I think had the title, it's time to recognize that Putin can't be destroyed or defeated in Ukraine. There does seem to be an effort to try to create an off-ramp, and they're sloppy about it. But I don't exactly know. I mean, it's such a shit show. It's tough to say exactly what they're thinking at this point in the game, besides, as you pointed out, just throwing more bodies into the fire. I don't know.
And you just mentioned Argentina there. I mean, I've seen a few kind of recordings of their new kind of leader, and he seems, well, you would think he's like one of the good boys, but I've heard he's burst another World Economic Forum puppet, like, and is just making it look like he's one of the good.
Milei is a complete plant. I mean, the guy, people, they got duped. And but it's a good sign. People should take a lesson and self-examine their assumptions, because we were profiled. Everyone who was championing Milei were profiled by social engineers who have our social patterns down. And so they know the flaws in the thinking of most conservatives, that they could play us like a fiddle if we're not self-aware of what these flaws are that the oligarchy has created for us to fall into these traps. Milei was always very knowable that he was a World Economic Forum devotee. He was always for breaking Argentina, always made this clear, to break Argentina out of any relationship with Eurasia, the BRICS, and put their destiny into the hands of the United States and the US dollar. Always. He was always clear on that. Always for the same Austrian school economics that were adopted under Kissinger's watch that justified the deregulation of the economy under Thatcherism, Reaganomics. That was all based on the idea that no, freedom is no government, less government is good, more freedom for the people, less regulation for the banks and private businesses. And ultimately, it wasn't like globalization's outcome was a set of errors based on good intentions. The outcome was to always get exactly what they got, which was the destruction of small and medium businesses, the destruction of the emasculation, the castration of sovereign nation states that would no longer have an ability to influence the economy. That was part of what Kissinger created with NAFTA, was like the idea that, okay, now you can be sued by a corporation as a national government if you do protectionism or if you do capital controls. Now all of a sudden private corporations can sue you. You could be taken down at the World Trade Organization. Supranational bodies could like represent corporations to take down nations if they tried to protect their people economically or do something that was outside of the North American Free Trade Agreement or the Maastricht Free Trade Agreement that created the euro. The whole idea was get at world government through the veneer of capitalism, but it was never that. It was always designed to destroy small and medium businesses, monopolize what little exists, and keep everybody addicted to something very controlled, while the world would be set up for a system of top-down, unelected bureaucracy controlling us. That was always the idea. So that's what Milei is doing. I mean, he's calling for basically cutting down the government, and sure, there's a lot of corruption and waste. No doubt. Yes, true. But by doing what he's doing, you could know that you're going to castrate Argentina's ability to carry out any type of harmonized action as a nation against the oligarchy. You're going to have no ability to defend the people. Yeah, this is exactly what Pinochet was assigned to do in the 70s in Chile. All of these right-wing governments that were put in power by the CIA in the 60s and 70s and 80s in South America, they were all doing the same thing. Massive liberalization of the economy, privatization of everything state-owned. And they had to do it through the help of like Nazi advisors like Klaus Barbie and all of the leading Nazis that were sent into Argentina and South America. They never left. They always advised the governments of Brazil and South America and Chile that always on behalf of the United Fruit and the British East India Company operations to kill the people who under fascism. So fascism was needed to be the enforcement mechanism of free trade onto a people who would suffer by having the social safety nets all destroyed, everything else, right, in favor of what the World Bank says is good. So, which is just absolute free markets. And I'm not against free markets, but it has to be done in a way that involves actual, authentic, honest competition, which you don't get if you have a City of London financier oligarchy. It's just a word; it's meaningless. So Milei is a disaster, and he said all the right words that appeal to the sensibilities of the conservative class out there. And all you have to do is just say the right words, stroke people's emotions, and they will more often than not end up supporting you, even if it means that your policies that they don't even take the time to think about are going to kill them because you don't like, LGBTQ brainwashing in schools, and you don't like the Great Reset, and you don't like global warming. You could say it, but then you just sign on to the COP28 agreements completely, fully, no, full commitment for carbon reduction. So it's just words. You have to look at not the words of what people say, but look at, like the Bible says, it's by their fruits that ye shall judge them, right? It's you look at for good or for bad. Look at their effects of what they've done, what their policies are, then make your decision. And Milei is such a train wreck.
You mentioned the Maastricht Treaty, and I remember when Ireland were, having the choice to vote. Not every country had that. It was the Lisbon Treaty. And I remember we voted no, but that wasn't the right vote. We had to vote again. And I remember there was a few politicians that had actually read through this, and I knew straight away, this isn't good. And the people that were actually, all the politicians, the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, were coming out telling people to vote for it. And they were even being exposed. They hadn't even read it themselves. So, like, when you've got the EU running in that way, created by not the people in Europe, which they think their MEPs are actually controlling this, and it's a big farce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's absolutely. It's total illusion of democracy, and these are the representatives of the liberal democratic rules-based order, right? Unelected bureaucrats like van der Leyen and now Zelensky, who abolished all elections as well. Biden, whose elections are whatever questionable. But the point is, yeah, I mean, these are the most anti-democratic, anti-capitalist institutions that are professing to represent the democratic capitalist West, and it's like, no, this is you're feudalists. These are feudalists, and feudalism can come under many different flavors. But it is what it is. It's the same thing always. Same thing that Isaac Newton worked for too, right? Isaac Newton was the master of the mint at the Bank of England from 1696 for many years, and that was a very powerful position at the Bank of England once it was created as the world's second private central bank. Still the center of world power today behind the City of London. And Isaac Newton was a sociopath, like this guy was in charge of the Recoinage Act that put hundreds of people to death that were, they basically stole money from the people by demanding everybody send in their coins, and then they were reissued new coins by the mint, but that had less metal in them, same number on the stamped on it. And so there's a massive theft from the people whose buying power was decreased, forced into poverty. People were forced to all of a sudden counterfeit, and anybody caught counterfeiting received the death penalty by Newton, and he wanted to watch. He got a fetish out of watching people die for trying to feed their families. Like this guy was a sick puppy, but he was a part of us. That's why they wanted him to be the president of the Royal Society, which he moved to the City of London. He moved it away from its old location near Cambridge into the City of London. Which is the real command center of the world. And the thing itself was always an occult black magician Rosicrucian hub carrying out witchcraft. It was never doing science. And that's part of why the Enlightenment, the Newtonian science was created as a false science, which was never a thing. It was just a shadow of a shadow. It had some usefulness as far as formulas being useful, but it had none of this. It had no truth to it, and it would cripple people who tried to abide by the best practices of the scientific world extolled by Newton and Samuel Clarke and his handlers and Robert Hooke, and who were all like hardcore occultists. They weren't actually so-called scientists. They never discovered anything. So they were all part of intelligence agencies, all tied to the same banking complex, all loyal to the same old hereditary systems of mystery cults that took on different brandings after Rome collapsed, but it's the same thing, same families, same structure of cult systems into the Hellfire Club, right, of Newton's time, and different expressions of the different Masonic United Grand Lodge of England and the Scottish Rite lodges that Albert Pike ran. It's all the same friggin' thing. It's no different from what was running Babylon as far as like an initiated priesthood of anti-humanists who despise people, see themselves as gods, and want to create false gods for us to worship in a superstitious cultural modality, while we're sacrificing and doing orgies and drugs onto some altar of Gaia, which in the ancient Roman world were the Earth Mother worship nature cults, right, of Cybele and Attis, things like that. So it's not that different. Today they're also infusing aliens into the mix too. Like that's part of the big hologram. The big puppet show is to now introduce their long-awaited grand unveil of aliens to be the new replacement gods and demons that we're supposed to be afraid of and adore in a variety of ways, controlled by a new priest class of puppet masters. So it's all a giant piece of theater. It's disgusting, but it helps to know the real sort of history of scientific discovery as a baseline to see, well, what is the oligarchy afraid of? What are they trying to, what do they see as threatening to them? And let's do more of that sort of thing is my philosophy.
So what light can we bring to the end to kind of shine people, put a smile on their face, because now we have to scare them the shit out of them with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
So I mean, Kissinger kind of croaking it might help a little bit, but just
that was finally,
they seem to be making a lot of errors. Is that intentional, or is it just to create confusion, to have everybody fighting at each other, or is it that they've reached a certain level, so much inbreeding and whatever, that they're losing control?
Well, in my analysis, oligarchies have multiple layers to them. In the inner layer of the higher priesthood, so-called, vicious is sin. Like the very opposite of all natural human sentiments one could imagine is a culture that has groomed out the very opposite passions that a healthy human should want, right? Passions are good, but they have to be tempered by, conscience, discovery, reason. Like these things temper our passions in a matter that our desires become duty over time. In a healthy, mature, integrated human being, you want to do what is good. It satisfies your soul, your conscience more than to do what might be more sensually satisfying, but ultimately worse for your more important spirit, your soul, people around you care about. All of these things will suffer if you give into those types of lower order hedonism. So the oligarchy is sort of the opposite. They've got a very different spirituality. They're vicious. I think pretty intelligent, but they rely upon many degrees of separation between those inner core sort of thinkers and those carrying out the consequences of their thoughts in the real sort of physical world. I shouldn't say, but the physical world. These are the auxiliaries. Now, the thing is, over time, the auxiliaries don't understand how they're tools or instruments of a higher will. They don't fully they are given their own micro mythology that animates their identities, that detaches them from the humanity that they're born into. They're attached. They play a certain role. Rhodes Scholars play a role. Fabians play a certain role. But I don't think, in my analysis, most of them fully understand the game. And there's games within games, right? There's subcults within subcults. Some are less instrumental but important. Some are more instrumental but still less important than others. So there's ways that this thing is, but it's not infinitely complex either. The mind can still, don't think that there's like infinite degrees of separation. There's still a quantization, right? A limited quantization of degrees separating thought from reality. Now, the auxiliaries will often be victims of the cultural engineering that's deployed to keep the majority stupid, self-centered, out of control of their own emotions. And so you see this with third, fourth generation oligarchs. If you look at the quality of mind of the younger breed of George Soros's kid, or look at the younger 20-something-year-old Rothschild kids. You can look at some of their behavioral patterns, doing like raves on yachts, dropping ecstasy. Like these kids are kind of like out of control, but they're the ones who are expected to manage the ship when the old class dies off. They've got like many years of decadence, of sort of getting fat in their own self-confidence of being the gods of Olympus, which is, I think, something which is useful for humanity. That the auxiliaries, especially the lower order auxiliaries, the Ursula van der Leyens, the people that they need to like do things on the ground, are mediocre as all hell. Like the quality of manager that Kissinger represented in his generation, they're mostly all dead now. That he represented a much more intelligent manager, disciplined manager ethic, as not moral ethic, but in terms of like discipline. You don't get that. There's nobody of even close. Who do you got? Anthony Sullivan, Blinken? Like, Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken? Are these like the analogs today of what the Kissingers should be? But they're so mediocre. So, and because they're victims of the culture that was created. So they don't know how to think that creatively or flexibly, and that's the usefulness for, I think, any patriots, is to be aware of the mediocrity of the auxiliaries of the system, which are, I think, making legitimate mistakes. There's some controlled opposition. There's a lot of controlled opposition everywhere you look. There's so much of it, but there's also authentic opposition happening too. It's not all controlled. So I mean, I look at Elon Musk versus what is it? There's a new fight that they're trying to create as a piece of theater between Hunter Biden and Elon Musk. And Hunter Biden has been assigned to come out and pick a fight with Elon Musk as like the stupidest smart guy I know. He's so stupid. You know, it is Hunter Biden. The guy's a walking clown show. Elon Musk, this guy's a transhumanist ideologue who they've created a persona out of this very inauthentic, rigid personality type who's very clearly a cardboard cutout. And everything he's done has been part of the program of creating a global a global centralized social credit structure based on infusing us with brain chips. And, you know, he's creating, what is it? mRNA vaccines through 3D printing in one of his Tesla companies. And he's working with the military industrial complex. And, his mother's into the occult. His wife was an occult witch. And it's like, these are the people you're surrounding yourself with, dude. I mean, and so they're obviously getting him to say all the right things, just like they got Millet to say all sorts of right things that were catering to the profile of an abused, traumatized conservative population that wants to just hear that somebody with power, somebody with strength is going to say, acknowledges this pain I'm feeling. And so they're like trauma cases who are being spoken to and being played around him now being like the great savior, which in my mind, his whole X thing, as he himself says, is supposed to be responsible for half the world currency in the coming system, which he already said back in the 90s when he brought the first version of X 1.0 online that was sold by a Bill Gates director for $20 million in 1999. So he's always made this clear that he wants X to be an everything zone where our biometrics, our everything are also tied to our electric cars. If we have enough social credits to own an electric car, that can be turned off remotely from a centralized place. That's tied to the whole like green shutdown. So and it's all just by saying nice things. And the part of the thing is to get everybody off of the real danger was Trump's Truth Social, which was, so they're trying to corral people away from anything that sounds kind of like what Trump was doing, but isn't it all doing that? Get them all back into Twitter in that controlled place. And then at that point, once they think that that's their freedom that they'll fight for, they're willing to, do whatever to stay within their little controlled zone of my Twitter space, my X space. So all that to say, that's like one of many examples of controlled opposition that I'm seeing. But overall, the reason why the oligarchy hasn't won, because the oligarchy hasn't won yet. If they had the power that a lot of people attribute to them, they already would have won many years ago. But the fact that there are nation states wielding power to stop and disrupt the depopulation agenda of the New World Order is provable. It's demonstrable. And I mean, that's why I wrote all my books, was to try to get at how that's been done throughout history, how that's being done today. Where has this principle of the sovereign nation state being wielded to stop depopulation agendas and feudalism? Where has that happened, and how is this happening today? You'll find it in Eurasia, examples of that. Even though Russia has a deep state issue and China there's deep state issues there, despite that there's national sovereignty also and a fight for it and utilization of it to defend people against the death cult. And so that's important for people to investigate. And there's breakthroughs in fusion power and in magnetic levitation, railways, all sorts of things that are currently only being used by the military industrial complex in the West, not for the civilians, which are being used for the civilian sector and the real economy in Eurasia, which we're not being told about, which is why there's a big push for war with China and Russia. Also, that's also part of the target to be destroyed.
Listen, just before I pass it back to Grace, it's always fascinating listening to you, but I'm just wondering, your books that you've written, especially your new one, is the audio available, and are you the voice behind the audio?
It's a pain in the arse. I gotta just do it. This one's a small enough book. I got volume 1 of my Clash of the Two Americas is an audio. But this one, it's small enough. I could just sit down and read it and record it. I should just do that or pay somebody to do that. Get back to you on that.
I think people would prefer to listen to your voice, because they'll feel the passion and everything, the energy that you give out when you're speaking.
Oh, thanks, man. I hope so. I'll give it a shot. It might take an afternoon. I could probably do it.
Listen, Matt, thank you very much. Pass you back to Grace.
All right.
Hi, Matthew. Do you want to conclude with your or give us a synopsis of your last chapter, because I think it would be interesting to share that. And in your chapter is the biogeochemistry and the open systems thinking with Vladimir Vernadsky.
Right. Yeah. Chapter 12. Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, as you pointed out, it's an introduction to the great biogeochemist Vladimir Vernadsky, who was the founder of ironically, the founder of the Ukrainian Academy of Science when Ukraine still had some really, really super smart people. Ukraine has such a rich, beautiful history. It's wild. But Ukraine is it's a big geopolitical battlefront. But Vernadsky was the president of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He was largely the founder, the father of Russian atomic science, and he was, in my assessment of his writings on the biosphere, on the noosphere, on biogeochemistry, on so many things, on some words about non-Darwinian evolution. He was really a Keplerian, a follower of the method of Kepler, of Pythagoras, of Plato in Russia, in a very tumultuous period. He worked very closely with Madame Curie. He was the student of Mendeleev, the discoverer of the principle organizing the periodic table of elements, right, around the periodic reoccurrence of certain attributes of crystallization and bonding of certain. So that's his teacher was Mendeleev, and some of the greatest minds of the world. And he identified that the only way to responsibly approach the study of natural science or the biosphere or anything was by recognizing that the biosphere was itself the consequence of astrochemical, astrophysical processes that are tied to the galaxy and cosmic radiation. So he begins his work on the biosphere by defining the spectrum, the octaves, the 8 of 40 known octaves of his time of electromagnetic frequencies that come in through and also which elements and isotopes were coming in through cosmic radiation into the Earth through principally the aurora borealis. That's where what you're seeing with aurora borealis is the influx, the constant flow of cosmic radiation from the solar and galactic medium moving through into both the Earth, inside the Earth, but also being distributed and creating sort of a force within the living systems of the Earth itself, being absorbed in all beings and then transmitted out of them, and then back out of the Earth into the electric circuit, which is our solar system and the sun and the broader galaxy. So he's approaching it very, very in a healthy, holistic way. It's so good. And he's like taking the time to look at the quantization of the many within the whole and the infinite. And he's making the point that there's 3 different coexistent phase spaces. And it's so important because we're told today that there's just one abiotic phase space called physical space-time. That's just like 3 dimensions plus time. We're given a very simplistic idea that the atom is just made up of non-living matter moving at random frequencies, random vibrations. That everything is intrinsically random at the small, living and non-living alike, and that the apparent existence of pattern of order that we find in living or non-living matter, the spheres of the planets, all of these things are just chance. It's lucky. There's no principled reason for intelligibility to be what it is, instead of just being random blah. It's stochastic bump. So Vernadsky's like, no, there's not just one phase space that we have to assume exists in which we have to interpret what living or thinking matter is. There's actually 3 coexistent phase spaces, which they occupy the same so-called space, but they're not in space. One being abiotic, the domain of so-called non-living matter, not animated by life, like a rock, in off a mountain, or certain types of rocks. Has carbon in it, or sand. There's carbon in it. There's nitrogen, other things, but it's not the motion of the molecules and the atoms are not influenced by the rock being alive per se. Those cycles aren't there. The moon is very boring in that sense. So that if you just trace over millennia the motion of a carbon atom on the moon, it's really boring versus a carbon atom in the crust of the earth or on the surface of the earth. It's much more exciting to watch one of these things move, especially if it's inside of a living thing. So the plant, my plant over there has carbon as well, and nitrogen and other things, but the cycles are much different. And there's carbon in this teapot, but the difference is that this teapot doesn't grow off a tree. I can't pick it off a tree. It's the effect of thought, right? Discoveries into ceramic, into enamel, into design, aesthetics. There's certain symmetrical designs, color, pigment science. So there's actually like probably billions of ideas that this is a fossil of. So you've got fossils in nature, right? And you can see the fossils of dinosaur bones, but you could also see fossils of thoughts. And I don't know the names of most of the people, but that would be responsible for everything that makes this thing a reality. But that's the noosphere. So you got the biosphere, the abiosphere, and the noosphere are three coexistent phase spaces. And he's like, if you have that as your framework, you can make discoveries that you couldn't make if you were approaching it from any other direction. And the important thing that he has in his understanding is that the noetic is maybe in time the most recent expression on the earth of these three phase spaces, right? Like, at a certain point, there was just living biotic and abiotic material. And at a certain point, the living started expressing consciousness. It started expressing self-awareness. And at a certain point, which we don't understand, self-awareness, the what we might call cognitive life, tool-making species that could ponder causality, why, that question, why, which doesn't really appear in my cat so much as it does in a child, that became much more normalized. So as soon as you had that, all of a sudden human beings weren't bounded by the same cycles shaping the apes and the chimpanzees that can't have more than a certain amount of a carrying capacity on the earth relative to however much food is bountiful in nature. And the monkeys can make certain limited kinds of tools, poking sticks, right, for getting better ants. They can sometimes some kinds of monkeys use rocks to break a nut. But you don't seem to have, despite this, and evidence of this having been used by monkeys 1,000 years ago, that we found examples of monkey practices breaking nuts with a rock 1,000 more years ago. There's no qualitative difference or improvement in the technology associated with nut cracking by monkeys 1,000 or 2,000 years ago versus today, or beavers that build dams today don't seem qualitatively different dams than the dams built in Babylonian Sumer's time. So human beings can not only use tools to transform nature according to desires of causation, purpose, better, worse, those judgment calls, but we also can make them better. We have this impulse for perfectibility. So, and when we have the political sort of freedom to express that, we can make huge leaps over our limits to growth. So Vernadsky was really of the belief that the whole universe was animated by, principally, even though there was like an abiotic domain, he didn't believe that there was any space in which life didn't exist or mind didn't exist. So he just, but life requires sometimes a mental, a material set of conditions to express itself in that fashion that it does on the sweet spot in our solar system that the Earth finds itself within. There's this temperature, electromagnetic sort of comfort zone, which is very conducive for the expression of the material of life. But that's not life, right? Life is something more than the material expression of it. It's the thing that gives vitality. So in Vernadsky's world, there's no volume of so-called space anywhere in the universe devoid of life as a principle, a dense, saturated principle everywhere. Just like there's no point that you could imagine mind not existing. It's just that, it happened to be that it required a certain amount of time, a certain type of physical environment for humanity to emerge with the type of brain system that we have. But the brain is a conduit. It's like in Vernadsky's writings, he understands it as I think it should be understood, as a throne or an instrument that mind expresses itself, but it is not mind. It is not the same thing as mind. So, the Vernadskyan method is just so useful. And like I said, his students and collaborators involved Alexander Gurvich, who created a whole revolution in optical biophysics, and many others. There's so many others. Gauss, not Carl Gauss, but the Russian Gauss, who discovered all of this, and who made a huge revolution in isomer technology and chemistry and life science in the 1970s and 80s, were students of Vernadsky and Gurvich. And there's this whole revolution that we're not told about. I think the Russians have become more aware of it. There's a revolution in appreciating Vernadsky's work in Russia. I just spoke at an event at the Russian Academy of Sciences last month, celebrating his 160th birthday, and that was nice. Whereas in the West, it's been totally cut off. So yeah, very useful to. I tried to make my last chapter an introduction to Vernadsky's thinking with an outline of his core, what I believe are his core texts that anyone could access that have been translated well into English. And they provide a good counterpoint to the fallacies of Darwinian biology, Darwinian evolution, and something more healthy, which is not simply just, absolute creationism either, which is where a lot of people think they have to choose between either being a Darwinian biologist or being somebody who takes the Bible or the Quran literally, or whatever Hindu text literally, instead of being a Darwinian. And it's like, no, you don't have to be a religious fundy or an empiricist. There's a healthier tradition of science that could be explored, which is, I think, much more in harmony with our soul's health.
Matthew, we did it again with your help, the one and only Matthew Ehret. So just so people know, others can read fast Matthew's book, but I can't, because there's so much information. It leads me to many other people that I like to check, and for sure I'd like to read more on Vladimir Vernadsky. But that's how it is. So it's very yummy. So even for you guys who are listening to this, you can keep on repeating certain periods and talking about spaces, and in between take a pause, reflect on what you have heard, what you listened to, because that's so crucial. So Matthew, tell them where they can follow you, where they can purchase your book, and oh, let me tell them that I love it that Matthew is in TNT. So Matthew is in TNT radio. So
right.
So there's no shortage of Matthew. If you want to follow him with, again, we all follow certain people with not blindly, okay? You say we're calling for an open system. So yeah, Matthew, go ahead and tell them where to get in touch with you.
Oh, thank you, Grace, and thank you, Roy. Well, the TNT radio show is a great experiment, and I just started doing this like 3 weeks ago. I've done 3 shows, and it's fun. It's a good exercise to shut up and listen, because I'm often speaking a lot, and it's a good. So my wife highly approves of of the new show, where I get to just ask experts about what they understand about things that are important. So that's fun. And so that's available on tntradio.live every Saturday from 11 to 2. If they want to buy my books, I saw you put it there on the screen, but they're on canadianpatriot.org is the easiest place to find all of the books. There's all sorts of little links you'll find if you take 2 seconds looking at the website that says buy the books here. And then, risingtidefoundation.net has a ton of good stuff on it too. A lot of our videos are going up there under the Rising Tide banner. My wife has really spearheaded a lot of new documentaries that we're creating. So that's really exciting. And we're doing regular events every Sunday and Wednesday. So if people want to get involved, I usually say, ideally get a paid upgrade through my Substack, and that'll give you access to all of the events. Otherwise, if times are tough, the economy is not good to a lot of people. I get it. So just send an email to info@risingtidefoundation.net, and we'll send you the invites to the events. And if you want to read the books as PDFs, and you can't afford them to buy them online, that's okay too. Just send an email there and ask, and you shall receive. That's it. That's
your
it.
Videos.
Mm-hmm.
Your sources of your video clips as well.
Oh yeah. There's all of the videos are always free access. Those are all the documentaries that we've been making, big and small, are on easier to find on Canadian Patriot. We have to make .org. We have to make a page to feature those on Rising Tide, which we'll do soon.
Yeah, and of course, Cynthia Chung, Matthew Ehret's better wife or better half. So
better half.
I think that's the right English term, right? Better half.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, there's a power duo. So when you go to any of this website, and one thing I know is when you link with one person who you can resonate with powerfully, morally, ethically, there you go. It opens up a whole door of opportunities and infinite possibilities in every spaces with harmony, as Matthew will always emphasize that. Okay? So take care, everyone. Do like, share, subscribe, follow Roy, Coughlan, follow Grace, Asagra, and any of our co-hosts who joins us. And of course, definitely make sure you connect with our guests. Thank you, Matthew, and feel better, please. All right? Take care.
Thank you. All right, bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and share with your friends. And you'll find all my shows with the QR code or bio.link/podcaster, as well as my podcast coaching. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, DanielPacker.com, helping people with anxiety, stress, and addictions. He's got a 90% success rate, and you only pay if you're successful. Also, if you'd like to go on a podcasting tour, I can help you do that. And if you're interested in sponsorship, you can contact me on my bio.link/podcaster. Until next week, take care.